On a warm afternoon, the sun beat down hard on the dusty farm road, where Laura, a farmer's wife, had just finished unloading the day's harvest. She wiped the sweat from her brow, taking a moment to appreciate the tranquility of the fields she'd worked tirelessly to cultivate. The fields, lush with crops she had nurtured from the earth, were her pride and joy. But there was no time for rest. Her husband, Frank, had been working the far side of the farm, but his age was beginning to show. He had retired from military service years ago, after decades of service that had shaped his body, mind, and soul. It had been a hard life, but a life that had provided for his family. As Laura set to work on the remaining chores, she noticed the rumble of motorcycles growing louder. A gang of bikers appeared on the horizon, their engines roaring as they pulled up to the farm gate. She could feel their eyes on her before they even stopped. The leader, a towering figure with tattoos snaking down his arms, stepped off his bike with an air of arrogance. He approached her with a smirk, his comrades following suit. Well, what do we have here?" he taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "A woman, all alone out here in the middle of nowhere. What's your husband doing, hiding from real work?" Laura straightened her back, trying to keep her composure. "I'm working, just like anyone else," she said firmly, though a knot began to form in her stomach. The bikers circled her like vultures, their laughter ringing in her ears as they made cruel jokes about her and the farm. She ignored them, focusing on the task at hand, hoping they would eventually leave. But they didn't. One of the bikers, a younger man with a mischievous grin, stepped forward. "Don't you get lonely out here?" he jeered. "A woman like you, stuck on a farm all day? I bet it gets pretty boring." Laura's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. But as they continued to harass her, she felt her patience beginning to wear thin. That's when she heard the distant rumble of an engine. It was deep and steady, unlike the reckless growls of the bikers' motorcycles. It was the unmistakable sound of Frank's old truck. The bikers paused, looking toward the sound, but Frank had already turned onto the farm's dirt road, his weathered face set in a determined expression. He pulled up beside the group, the dust swirling in his wake. As he stepped out of the truck, the bikers' laughter faded into an eerie silence. Frank was a man of few words, but his presence commanded respect. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his military past still etched into his every movement, even though he no longer wore a uniform. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on the leader of the bikers. The leader, who had been mocking Laura only moments ago, seemed to lose some of his bravado. "What's the problem, old man?" he sneered. "Your wife can't take a joke?" Frank didn't flinch. He looked directly at the man, his voice low but firm. "You'd better leave my wife alone." There was no hint of fear in his tone, no hesitation, just a calm, unwavering authority. The bikers laughed, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. Frank wasn't like anyone they had encountered before. He didn't wear a badge or a flashy title, but his military service had taught him how to handle a situation like this. He had faced down enemies who were much more dangerous than this group of rowdy bikers. And the bikers could see it in his eyes. "You really think you can intimidate us, old man?" the leader said, stepping forward. But Frank was already in motion, his military training taking over. With a swift and practiced move, he grabbed the leader by the arm, twisting it behind his back and forcing him to the ground in one fluid motion. The other bikers froze, unsure of what to do. Frank stood tall over the leader, his grip unyielding. "I didn't want this to be a fight," Frank said, his voice steady. "But if you don't leave now, it's going to get ugly." The bikers looked around, their bravado fading as they realized they were out of their league. One by one, they backed off, their eyes on Frank as they retreated to their motorcycles. Laura stood there, stunned. She had always known Frank was strong, but she had never seen him in action like this before. As the bikers rode off into the distance, she ran to him, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered, looking up at him in awe. "I didn't know you could do that." Frank softened, pulling her into his arms. "I didn't want you to have to see it," he admitted, his voice gentle now. "But I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." They stood there, the sun beginning to set over the fields they had built together. In that moment, Laura realized something. Frank wasn't just a farmer, and he wasn't just her husband. He was a man who had fought for everything he had, a man whose past would always be a part of who he was. But that past wasn't something he wore on his sleeve. He wore it quietly, in his actions, in his ability to protect the ones he loved. Ass. The day faded into night. Laura looked at Frank, her heart swelling with pride. She didn't just love him, she respected him more than ever. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because Frank wasn't just a man with a military past. He was the man who had her back, always.